Welcome to Breaking the Grade.
A high-powered personality in the fashion industry decides she wants to move into the education space. And she is successful in her first attempt to create a beautiful space for parents to work and children to learn. But what happens when our education entrepreneur, Keltse Bilbao, decides she wants to take her concept from California to New York and beyond? In this episode of Breaking the Grid, you will learn how Keltse went from fashion to families and created a super sleek and successful daycare plus co-working space for parents, big and tiny, in Santa Monica. How her first East Coast location is doing and how she has created demand and a waiting list for the new location. And why this education entrepreneur from the fashion world thinks she can redefine how daycare is done. Breakers band together and be attentive as Keltse dishes on her journey of breakage and brilliance. Keltse, John, join me.
Hey,
Hi,
Keltse,
John.
how are you?
Good, thank you. So nice to see you both.
Yeah, here we are. It's taken us a little while to get to this show, but I'm really excited about it because I think the timing is right because you're going to tell us all about the New York location. But before we get to New York and go to California, let's travel the world with you. And let's start in Spain. Let's talk about you growing up in Spain and then going to college. Can you guide us on that journey real quickly so we can understand
Sure.
you?
Of course. I think like most of the teenagers at the time, I was confused. I really didn't know what to do, what to study. So it took me 3 years to get into the right place. I studied aeronautic engineering. I studied 2 years of engineering and then I decided to do economics. I wasn't really inspired. I was looking for, you're supposed to go to college. My mom said, you have to do a degree. And I say, guess what? I think economic is going to be useful in my life. So that's what I ended up doing. That's how I started college. And I was more interested in working really and getting hands on into an experience than really going to college. So I started a job in there and I was, kind of like bouncing between college and some internship that I was doing at the time. So that's how I started in Spain into my college experience.
Amazing. What a journey. And before we get into Big and Tiny, which is just a story in of itself, what was the end roads? What got you into entrepreneurship? What got you interested? What was the foray into that world and that journey?
So as I mentioned before, I started working while I was in college, and then I was really interested in traveling and getting to know different cultures. I applied for an Erasmus exchange program during my last year of college, and I ended up in Belgium. Um, and after that, I really didn't want to go back to Spain. I wanted to keep traveling the world. So the company that I used to work with, which was in communication, it was an advertising and marketing agency. They offered me a job in Miami, and my dad was an entrepreneur, but I had a mentor at the time who was the owner of this communication group, who taught me and influenced me during all these years while I was in college and later in Miami. So I think that was probably one of the main reasons why I ended up being an entrepreneur. I kind of like learn from him. But I think it's a lot that it's on my personality. I like change. I love change. I love pivoting. I'm not scared of moving from one place to another. And I kind of even like the risk that comes with it and the excitement that comes with it. So I think it's a little bit addictive. And so I think there is no other way for me.
Yeah, you're certainly amongst friends who find that pivot, that change, that breakage addictive as well.
Yeah.
But one of the threads that you have kind of had run through your resume is fashion. So how'd you get into fashion?
Well, I always liked fashion. It was something that I really enjoyed. And when I was living in Miami, I decided one of my dreams was to move to New York. So I enrolled in NYU in a marketing program. And while I was in there, I wanted obviously to start having some experience working in New York. And I got a job in a consulting firm in fashion industry. So that's a little bit how I ended up in fashion. And then since like after living in New York for quite a while, I moved to Mexico and I used that experience and the contacts that I had in the fashion industry. And I launched my first business, which was a multi brand clothing store in Mexico City.
So that brings you kind of almost full circle. You had a father who kind of modeled entrepreneurship. You had a
Mhm.
great mentor. You were interested in fashion. Then all of a sudden, this idea for Big and Tiny. I'm curious about sort of the aha moment that gets you from fashion to transformative daycare and co-working spaces.
I think it's more related than what we think. I did. I moved from Mexico. I sold the multi-brand store. I moved to New York, and I launched my second company, which was a footwear brand. So I made shoes, designed shoes, sold shoes in the U.S. for 5 years. And at the end of the day, I'm a designer. I love designing, and I love experiences. So part of Big and Tiny and how it was born, it was um, my own experience as a mom, as an entrepreneur, as a designer, of trying to provide a beautiful and elevated experience for families. So even the spaces are very carefully designed, from the co-working to the classrooms for the kids. So I like to think also it has some component of like fashion and design into the spaces and even the program. So I think it's more related than what we think.
It's interesting.
Before
It's sort of you become the product of your own experiences, and they kind of stack onto each other, and you get to this place with Big and Tiny. But you mentioned you're a mom, and you also
Mhm,
mentioned the importance of education.
mhm.
Tell us how that brought you to the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Education and their education entrepreneurship program, and what are some of the things that you learned there that made you think that, hey, maybe I want to go all in on this Big and Tiny uh, program?
Yeah, so I decided to enroll in UPenn a little bit after I launched Big and Tiny. So I launched Big and Tiny to provide these experiences, to provide um, a need flexibility into this industry. And when I opened the doors and we started to bring kids in, I realized how important the early childhood education is. Like 95% of you know the brain develops between the first 6 years of their lives. So I realized we were really impacting these kids and these families, and I got really passionate about education. I started doing research, I reading some books, and I said, "Look, this is amazing. I really want to get deep into this." So I enrolled in UPenn. I did a master's in education, and I was really inspired by, I learned so much. This wasn't really my background. So I learned a lot about so many theories, philosophies, and different ways of teaching early childhood education, and did inspire me to work towards designing a very innovative curriculum, which we use inquiry-based learning, and teaching the kids how to think and how curiosity can lead into this learning experience. So all these things really inspire me into making things differently and bringing this curiosity, critical thinking, and inquiry into our curriculum.
the we're talking a lot about learning as we go for kids, for adults. John mentioned something. We're a product of our own experiences, and we're certainly going to talk about Big and Tiny. But I also wanted to bring up a tough experience that you mentioned to me and go a little bit deeper on the shoe company that you started,
Mhm.
and what ended up happening with that. Because we, this group who's been there, done that, failed, and been successful, I think can get inspiration from the story of the shoe company that you started with your friend and what ended up happening with that.
Are you talking about the footwear brand?
Yeah.
Or I had different companies. Are you talking
Yeah.
about
You
the
know,
one in the skincare and the beauty industry?
successful, but you had manufacturing issues.
Oh, yeah, that's the footwear brand. As you can see, it's been quite a journey, and in each
Yeah.
one of them, I learned so many different things. But yeah, being into manufacturing in the fashion industry was definitely interesting and challenging. We moved production. We started in Mexico, so this company started in Mexico. The idea was born in Mexico. I launched this company with a very close friend of mine, and we started in Mexico, and we started with obviously small orders, right? We started selling to different boutiques in the US, and in some cases we had 100 or 200 pairs of one style. And so obviously we would go to Leon, and we would find factories, and they would say like, yes, of course, you want to factor these boots for you. And then at the end of the day, they would get a Steve Madden order with tens of hundreds of thousands of pairs per style, and they would put our orders like at the end of the queue. So I remember being like deadlines and having to deliver our shoes to like one of our biggest orders in a department store, and shoes were not ready. So having to travel to Mexico, go in different trucks, bringing it to different places for cutting, for stitching, and going through all these adventures to make it happen. So that was definitely a challenge.
Yeah.
And then we moved production to China, which was even worse because, every time that I had to travel and fix something, there was a language barrier. You had to go to Hong Kong and then take a train. So, lots of experiences for sure
I'm
and
I'm gl-
adventures.
I'm glad that Josh applied the brakes and said, "Hold on a second. See, I want to go right into the education play. I want to go right into big and tiny. I want to hear about the founding story." But I
We're going to
think
talk
with
about that after.
I think of, I
You and I.
think about with breaking the grade, we do think about how we have been broken, and I would only imagine, Kelsey, that as you were thinking about big and tiny, all of a sudden the pandemic happens, right? So you have to think about being adaptable. You have to think about
Mhm.
maybe I need to fail fast, fail smart, learn from my mistakes, and maybe those experiences with your fashion line and your fashion play comes in, said, hey, I can get through this. Maybe there's some potholes, you have to overcome
For sure.
certain hurdles. Tell us about that process of you've got these experiences, you've got a father who's an entrepreneur, you've got a great mentor, you have this idea for sort of the fusion of childcare with great academics and co-working space, and then all of a sudden, boom, the pandemic hits. How do you address that? How do you look at that through a positive or an asset lens instead of a deficit lens?
Yeah, so that was a tough one. Just before the pandemic hit, we opened our second studio in here in LA in Silver Lake, and I think it was like 2 3 months after when we were starting to build our community, um, the pandemic hit. So to be honest, in the beginning, I'm the type of person who is always like, I always find a solution. So I was like, no, I was completely in denial. I was like, I'm gonna make this work. Yes, I was sending emails to my community like, do not worry, we're gonna be here for you. We're gonna stay open, And at some point, it was like, no, I can't. It's not up to me. So that was definitely a very important learning for me. And well, one of the things, obviously, we closed both the studios for 3 months, and it was tough, thinking about my teachers, my employees, my community, the people who continue working on Zoom, but suddenly they had to go home and they didn't have childcare. So,
Mhm.
thinking of them, one of the things that always motivates me and drives me is to help my community, right? So I do everything I can. So I remember at the time and say, okay, we're gonna do big and tiny on the go. And my employees were like, what? It's like, yeah, sure. We're gonna bring teachers and we're gonna bring to their places, and we'll take care of the kids, we'll do groups. And it was a little bit too early. At the time everything was closed. So even teachers were scared of like getting in a car and going to someone's homes. So I say, okay, maybe this is too early. We'll wait. And then as soon as we were allowed to open 3 months later, I put that in place. So it was interesting. I had no idea how to do it. And I looked at my clients and I went for a few meetings and I look at them and they were like, okay, so how are you going to do this? And I was like, I don't know. And I was like, well, look,
Mhm.
we'll bring materials. We bought like these portable tables and chairs, and we'll provide the curriculum, and we're going to make a fun experience. So it was a lot of learning. We had to hire 10 teachers. We did really well. That helped us survive. But it was also challenging. I had to suddenly hire 10 people, no time for training, no time to it was kind of crazy, but everyone was super grateful and they understood that this was new to us. And I would go literally to these spots myself and make notes and talk to parents and yeah, that's what we did. We pivoted.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, Flex, my former company, is moving at the speed of light just as much as we could, setting up enrichment online, daycare online, which is crazy to think about. That's not going to work now.
Yeah.
And then what we did is we partnered up with co-working spaces,
Mhm.
some fantastic co-working spaces in the DC area who had been making $10,000 a month, renting out these fantastic offices. And we said, well, we can't pay you $10,000 a month, not even close, we'll be honest, but we'll give you, a percentage of every kid that we can put in here. And, obviously there's lots of restrictions on ratios at this point. So we're going to need lots of space. And it worked out and parents were happy. So
For sure.
um, I
I
guess,
think it's finding the opportunities as well. So, as you mentioned, we did something similar with a co-working space. So we brought childcare to a place called Second Home here, and it was a great experience. But
right.
also thinking of all the positive things that the pandemic brought. For example, like we got the opportunity to talk to like real estate groups that needed to bring people back to their offices, to their
Mhm.
um, you know uh, buildings, and they were really interested in thinking creatively and look for other services. So it also gave us opportunities to partner up with Brookfield and then open New York. So it's there's
Yeah.
always a bright side to everything.
I got a question for Professor Gamba. Chicken or the egg, nature versus nurture. My background is in broadcast journalism and sports, and now I'm an education entrepreneur forever, I would imagine. Keltse, similar. Fashion, education entrepreneur, probably forever. So, when you're meeting and coaching entrepreneurs who come from outside, do you ever encourage them to stay in the lane that they're in, or do you spot something in them that says whatever lane these people get in, they're going to find a way to be successful? How does that work?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I do a lot of I ask a lot of questions when, say, academics and instructors or administrators in schools want to become entrepreneurs, and we have a lot of those types of questions. Well, what about your experiences can you leverage to make you a great education or ed tech entrepreneur? And Kelsey just hit the nail on the head. A lot of what she's doing with Big and Tiny is a product of her training and a product of her conviction as it relates to great design. And if you've ever seen Big and Tiny, you know what she means by that. It's beautiful. It's beautifully simple. It's an amazing fusion of incredibly designed childcare space with incredibly designed co-working space. And I think that wasn't an accident. She, from what I've seen,
Mm.
was able to apply what she's learned so far and apply it to developing this amazing value proposition, which is truly unique. So I think it's really looking at your experiences and trying to figure out what you can apply from those experiences to make you successful in your next experience, even if you're making a big leap, fashion to, and you saw how Kelsey tied it together.
Yeah. So there's, some uh, look yourself in the mirror questions people can ask themselves if they do want to make the jump from any industry into education. Can you apply? Have you obviously you don't have to name names here, but have you ever had to have that tough conversation with somebody and said, maybe stick to the industry you're in, you're really good at it?
I
Have you?
mean, without naming names,
Right.
I have had honest conversations with people who I challenged them, but I have to admit those conversations actually turned into me being convinced that they could do
Mm.
it, and they did, and they succeeded. But yeah, you have to have those conversations. I also think, and Kelsey and I have had some of these conversations. When you decide to do what you've decided to do, this is an education play, and she's really gotten very intentional about the academic model, the learning taxonomies, the outcomes that are going to be delivered through and with these students to ensure that they're eventually college and career ready. I mean, this is daycare, but she's already thinking, how are we developing critical thinking skills? How are we developing creative problem solving skills? How are we ensuring that this is truly different? We are charging a premium price, truly different in terms of getting students, getting learners ready for academic success. So those conversations I love to have, which is, how do you bring together all of your experiences but focus on a value proposition that's actually going to bear success?
Kelsey, that brings me to a question for you, which is, you talked about your father, you talked about your Miami mentor, but what about choosing the right mentors? John, Professor Gamba, I think is a mentor to many, but you feel like you're having an individual conversation, and you absolutely are. Have you, do you remember the tough conversations, and how do you select your mentors? Because they're obviously been very influential to you.
Sure. I think we're still in the process of choosing the right mentors. I think at this point we are looking for people from different industries, not just in education. Of
Mm.
course, education is the biggest and the core of the business. But at the same time, it is a combination where we're looking for experts in real estate, to help us find those new spots and to expand in technology. This is something that we hopefully want to develop quite soon. So, this is not my expertise. So I need those mentors to come and help me define the product and, brainstorm in how that component is going to look like. And then, of course, entrepreneurs, friends uh, that are very successful and that are going through some of these things. Whether that's fundraising or it is in escalating the business. And I think at the end of the day, it's really important because it's a lonely journey. So you definitely need mentors and friends to go through this process.
Yeah.
What I think is key in terms of providing mentorship is to not impart knowledge. It's not the mentor's job to go to Kelsey and say, this is what you need to do. It's really about listening and understanding someone like Kelsey's non-negotiables. Like, design and premium price is a non-negotiable. She believes, and I have been convinced because of working with her, that the design and the experience of Big and Tiny is critical to its success. So I would never come in and say, you need to price it lower, or you need to. So understanding the non-negotiables, understanding the value proposition through the lens of how it's going to be presented, how it's going to be priced, how it's going to be promoted, I think is critical. And then I think the entrepreneur has to find it in themselves to execute accordingly.
Thank you for pulling back some of the kimono there, of how we're having these conversations that do end up being very successful. So, Kelsey, question for you. When you are talking to investors, is it challenging, and can you impart some knowledge or some of your experiences to some other folks out there who have started businesses? You talked about education, you talked about technology, and you talked about real estate. So does anybody who, somebody in the room probably thinks they're the smartest person in the world, say, well, which one is it?
Oh yeah, that's definitely. Um, At the end of the day, depending on who you talk to, I see a lot of investors always asking the question about like, how is this business scalable? And that's a question that I'm always like, okay, here we go. You're always going to find that question, and they're going to be like, is this a real estate business? How can you scale this? They just want the tech component, right? So you know that you're talking to the wrong investor. We definitely want to, as I say, develop this technology part, but the core of the business is, as we said, this location, the schools, the experience, and especially because it's like 0 to 5 years old, it's really hard. You're not going to start teaching kids online, so it's we get that all the time. Like, is this a real estate business? Is this an education business? Is this are you a WeWork? We get that question all the time, and we were like, oh,
Hmm.
here we go, WeWork. Now everybody is like, okay, scared about the co-working industry. And I like to say, like, this is the school, and the education is the main component, and this is the industry. However, we do offer amenities like co-working, but this is not where the business model is. This is an amenity the same way that we do parenting education and we do workshops. So, for clients to understand, and I always say, like, this is very scalable. There is very many successful companies such as KinderCare or Bright Horizons who have grown this into like thousands of locations. So it is really scalable. Whether you want me to do it in 10 years so you can get your return on investment, that's a different thing, right? So yes, we do get a lot of questions about like technology, or is it real estate? Are you gonna buy the buildings where you are, the buildings or the spaces where you're gonna open your next location? So, at the end of the day, it is an education. We're school, we lease spaces, so we do creative partnerships, but we do have some components of all of them.
I see that all the time too. I see, and Keltse's done a great job with this, and that is an investor will want to see a sustainable competitive advantage. They're going to want to understand what makes Big and Tiny innovative, what makes it different. Then she'll get into it, this fusion and this connection between childcare and flexible co-working space. And then the investor will say, but you have to focus. So how do you kind of navigate those waters of sustainable competitive advantage, but focus, focus, focus? And I think that's a real trick, whether you're in seed, Series A, or even beyond in sort of growth equity, of threading that needle, really presenting something that is unique, but showing that you can focus on in terms of your execution, is really, really the ones that are most successful as they go out and grow a business and raise capital.
Well, I think we just saw kind of a scenario play out, what online or in person, where I was kind of playing the role of the jerk investor. Keltse leaned in, she knocked it out of the park, and then her mentor, her advisor, if John had been joining you, would say, and here's how it really plays out in real life. So that was a fun role play right there. But Big and Tiny is not role play; it's the real deal, and we're 100% behind you. Last update, if you can, before we rock and roll out of here, is tell us about the opening of New York, which was delayed if the last time we talked because of some fire drill or fire alarm. You'll explain it better. And then now we're looking back to California. Update us, please.
Yes. We started construction almost a year ago in New York. And you're right, we were delayed. I think it was 5 months due to fire alarm approvals. So they have to approve the drawings, and it took us 6 months to get that approved. So it's been very challenging. I would email like the deputy director in the New York Fire Department every week. I would email everyone, calls to the point that we're like, okay, fine. We're gonna move this to the beginning of the line. But I was trying to explain to them how, we keep a school year calendar. It's not like a retail store that doesn't really affect as much if you open in January versus in November. So for us, we really needed to get ready by August, and it was really challenging. We had to get everything expedited, ask for so many, letters and emails, and we got it. And but yeah, it was delayed, so that's been a challenge. We opened the last week of August, so most of the families were already, they either they enroll in something, some of them were in waiting
Mhm.
list, so it's been a challenge calling everyone and saying yes, we're ready. But obviously in the beginning we didn't know if we were going to be ready, so it was a huge responsibility because families depend on their childcare to be able to go back to work. So yes, that was quite a challenge for us in New York, but we were able to get all the permits and be on time and train the teachers and be ready by last week of August.
As an entrepreneur
And
who has,
now,
well, as an entrepreneur who has had offices both on the East and West Coast, Keltse, I have to ask you this question. I've been dying to ask you this question. When I was operating on both coasts, I remember sharing a story that the difference between West Coast customers and East Coast customers is not when you're on the West Coast and you're walking down the street and you say, "How you doing?" You really mean F you. But when you're walking down the street in New York, somebody says F you, but they really mean how you doing. And that's the differences in terms of the clientele that we're dealing with. Tell us about the differences in the customer base on the East and West Coast from your experience so far. Differences or no, not so much?
No, there are definitely differences. I guess I'm still trying to figure it out. But I see that in general in New York, everyone is tough. They want to know everything. Okay, the admission agreement. No, we need changes. So we have a lot of clients here who never asked me to do like changes in the admission agreement. And we have lawyers here in New York. It was like, okay, point, point, point. I had to make so many changes, adjustments. They want to meet all the teachers prior to this. They want to make so many trials. It's very interesting, but definitely more. They're very detail oriented. They want everything right. They want so many exceptions, and we try to please them. So it's definitely very interesting in LA. I don't even know if they read the admission agreements. It just some of them will, but they sign. It's fine. It's a little bit more casual for sure. For sure.
It's certainly not Miami. It's certainly not Spain, and it certainly isn't Belgium.
it ain't Mexico. That's
That's
for
right.
damn sure.
And
I
it's
can
not
tell you
Mexico, no one would read that agreement for sure.
that. No. We're all good here. Well, so wherever you are, we think you're going to be successful. And this has been a really great conversation among other topics that we discussed that I didn't anticipate, which is all good. Really talking about mentors because you've had a lot of mentors in your life and you've had the ups and downs that I think people can draw inspiration from. So we'll keep in touch. We'll keep cheering for you. There's a community of breakers who are, also here to support and open up New York, open up California, bring it down back here to Mexico. Philadelphia is probably ready for you. So, just reach out and we'll help out as much as we can.
All I want to say is if anybody's listening today, Google Big and Tiny, go check it out. I would say go visit, go see and experience the magic. You will not regret it. It's really, truly an inspiration and truly a transformation in early childhood education and co-working space. So congratulations on what you've built, and we're excited to see how you grow.
Yeah.
Thank you
And
so
I
much.
point out
Very
for our
much.
listeners that is a first. Professor Gamba saying, go check this out. I mean, you've obviously been impressed with all the people, but I know that you're really impressed with Big and Tiny. And so that is a first. So definitely listen to the great professor.
Yes, I'm a big fan.
Cool.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
We're here to support all these families transitioning to, parenthood. So yeah, come check it out. And thank you
Thanks,
so
Joe.
much for inviting me.
Adios.
This was really fun and exciting.
Totally. Adios.
Thanks for listening, Breakers.